Welcome to the Solving Poker Super Series, a recurring segment where you and I are going to be analyzing some hands using piosolver and seeing what we can learn along the way to make our game better. Let's start out by looking at hand number one that I played recently online. For this one, we get dealt ace-queen in the cutoff. I raise to 30 cents playing 5 cent, 10 cent, and get a very strange raise to 50 cents from the small blind. Now, this doesn't make sense. It's a minimum raise. Like, what in our range wants to do this? I couldn't tell you. This doesn't make a ton of sense. But our price is incredible. I think we could go for the 4-bet. Since it's a weird line, we have position. I don't know if he's trying to get us to re-raise one more time so that he can make a giant raise. So in this case, I'm just going to call the bet and analyze on the flop. We get a pretty dry flop. King 9-6. He's going to be incentivized to continue often on this flop. Most of his range I would expect should be betting, and he chooses to check. So it would make a lot of sense that he's going to have missed this flop. I have an overcard, and he probably doesn't have a king because he chose not to bet. Now the 10 of hearts shows up when I check back, and he bets 20 cents, which is just such a small amount. He bets like 20% of the pot. I decide to raise him here, and he makes the call. We go to the river, which is the 3 of clubs, so I have bricked out. He checks, and I'm just going to put max pressure on him, make him decide for his whole stack, and he does fold. Now let's go to the solver and see what the solver actually has to say about this. First, let's start out by looking at his range and seeing what he's supposed to be doing on this board. So it comes King 9-6 rainbow. That's really good for him, and he now chooses to check. But if you look at what his range should be doing, it favors him here. He was technically the pre-flop aggressor, even though it was kind of a weird spot where, but I chose not to 4-bet him, and that's significant. So technically he is the aggressor. Our ranges are actually going to be more mirrored than normal here since he took a less aggressive action, if that makes sense. He didn't go so big to give me a hard decision, and so not much of my range is actually going to get away from this on the bet. So our ranges actually look pretty mirrored, and it's going to chop off the top end of his range because he's not really going to be incentivized to do this with aces, kings, queens, etc. The only thing I could see that maybe he's doing is either he misclicked or he is trying to get me to 4-bet with a premium hand. I don't think that's the case. I think for the most part, this was probably just a weird play. You see all kinds of weird stuff when you're playing these micro stakes. All right, so I took out the aces, kings, queens, etc. because I don't think he's going to have them. I think he's going to be betting bigger with those, and so therefore we're not going to really, as far as from hand reading, we're not going to give him credit for those very often. So then the question is, when he does check here on the flop, what should he be checking back with? Well, you can see from the solver, he's not checking back much at all, but if he is checking, it's a lot of ace high and then middling pairs. So a lot of these like weak hands that have some showdown value and don't really want to bloat the pot. Now let's look at the check back portion of my range, and you can see that the ace-6 suited is like one of the biggest candidates for that check back. We've got some ace-queens, and those are checking back about 50% of the time. And then some of our bottom pairs that don't have a set are choosing to check back as well. So our 5s, 4s, etc. On the turn, we see the 10 of hearts, and now my opponent is going to choose to bet 20% pot. This is a very unusual sizing, and you can see that the solver's preference here for most of his range is just to check back. I gave the solver multiple sizes, and it still is just not choosing to bet very often based on the action. This card doesn't bring a whole lot in. It doesn't change many things, and so the value hands, some of the 10s maybe, are going to choose to step up and bet now, but there just aren't a ton of 10s in his range that are excited about this card and want to bet that didn't already have a hand. Like King 10 is one of your better candidates, the ace 10s of the world, but really most of the range now wants to just check back. So 20% pot, probably not the sizing that should be used here. If you're going to make a stab at this thing, I would, as an opponent, I would choose to bet bigger, simply because then you have more fold equity. You have almost no fold equity here. So he bets 20% pot, and now if we take a look at his range and what it's actually made up of, you can see that there's a lot of ace high here, and this was my thought process at the time, is that if he doesn't have the king, he maybe has like ace 10, a small pocket pair, something like that, and he was choosing not to bloat the pot, and now he's going to either bluff at it, or he's got this middling hand, he's going to see if he can get value out of something like an ace high. But again, really strange sizing. So he bets 20%. You can see that his range is fairly weak overall. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a move here. You can see here that with ace-queen, I'm supposed to be calling most of the time. Now, calling went through my mind for a second, but I just thought, man, his range is going to be so weak, I should be able to steal this thing here. And so I did go for the raise. The reason that the solver's not going to choose this hand is it's not the weakest of my range. When you talk about polarizing your range, you're going to choose your weakest hands and your strongest hands to bet with. You're not going to choose your middling hands. And though ace queen is just ace high at this point, it's a pretty strong combo draw because my opponent doesn't have a king here. If we apply simple hand reading, we can assume that this opponent doesn't have a king. This was a super dry board. He raised preflop. He's incentivized to take this thing down. And if he has a king, he doesn't want to give us free cards. We did call, even though it was a weird 3-bet, we did call a 3-bet. And so, an ace on the turn might not be the best card for him. He's incentivized to bet. So that said, we now have 2 overcards and a gut shot, which makes this more of a middling portion of our range rather than on either of the extremes. And for that reason, with such a good price, we can just make the call here. I just sensed weakness and thought, I can steal this thing. There's no way he's going to hold on to this street and the next based on his action up to this point in the hand. So I end up making the raise here, but as you look at this chart, you can see that really all I'm raising with are sets and straights and a couple of bluffs. This hand probably doesn't belong there, and so for that reason, I don't love my play in retrospect, but I did not even spend enough time considering that I should just be calling. Typically, when you look at a solver, what it's going to have you do is it's going to have you choose something like a gut shot where you have weakness with this hand, but you have the potential to draw out to the nuts and get paid big, even if you do get called, versus just betting with pure air, right? And so in my mind, I think just being trained like, oh, this is a gut shot, this is a decent spot, he's showing weakness, that's what my mind went to. And when we analyze this, it makes a lot of sense that that's not a solid play and not the thing that I should be trying to do here. The river is the 3 of clubs. They choose to check again. And when they check again, you can see that a lot of that is like bottom pair, middle pairs, ace highs, things that we're probably going to be able to get to fold with another bet. So now I choose to go all in on the river. You can see up here that he's folding out his 7s, his 8s, his remaining ace highs. Those are all the things that we expect him to have. And so for that reason, it does work. I do want to show you something here. The problem with the hand that I chose to turn into a bluff here is I sensed weakness and I pounced on it, but I did it with a hand that had too much equity. I had a ton of draw equity. So I have an ace, a queen, or a jack that can show up, and I'm going to be happy to see any of those cards. Plus, there is a slim chance that my hand is just good here, that he's stabbing with an ace high to see if I'll go away, and that at showdown, I might have the best ace. So I chose kind of a poor candidate, and I'm used to doing that because it'll choose so many of the gut shots as a bluff. However, look at the gut shots that it is choosing. It's choosing 7-5 suited. It's choosing the Jack 8 suited. It's choosing 5-4 suited, which isn't even a gut shot. It's just trash. So your absolute weakest hands and then your strongest hands, that's going to balance out your range. And that middling stuff, I should be choosing just to realize and make this call here since I have so much potential to improve on the river. Hope you learned something. Hope you found it helpful. I'm going to keep these coming. I would love to hear a hand from you guys. So if you have a hand that's interesting and you want to run it through the solver and talk about it, send it on in. My email is in the description below, and we'd love to hear from you guys with some interesting hands that we can analyze, talk through, and we'll get better together as we spend some time using computers to help us become superhuman. All right, watch for more of these videos. They'll be coming out your way soon. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day. I will talk to you next time.